The morning sun was just starting to peek through the tall pine trees when Dr. Amara Thompson pulled her silver SUV along the dirt road that led to Crystal Lake. She had been driving for 3 hours from the city, and her body was ready for a break from the busy world she lived in every day. The trailer behind her car bounced gently over the small rocks and bumps in the road. This wasn't just any camping trip for Amara. This was her special place, her own little piece of heaven that she had worked so hard to buy. Amara stepped out of her car and took a deep breath. The air smelled like pine needles and fresh water. She could hear birds singing in the trees and the gentle sound of small waves hitting the shore. This was exactly what she needed after spending the last 3 months working 18-hour days to launch her new software product. Her tech company had grown from just her working in her garage to employing over 200 people. But success came with stress, and these quarterly camping trips were how she recharged her batteries. She walked around to the back of her SUV and started unloading her gear. Amara believed in camping comfortably. Her tent was top of the line, designed to withstand any weather but still give her the space she needed. Her camping chairs were the kind that made you feel like you were sitting in your living room. She had a portable coffee maker that could brew espresso just as good as any coffee shop in the city. Some people might call it glamping, but Amara called it smart camping. As she set up her tent, Amara thought about how different her life had become. 10 years ago, she was working 3 jobs just to pay rent on a tiny apartment. She would eat ramen noodles for dinner and dream about having enough money to buy name-brand cereal. Now she owned a successful business, a beautiful house in the suburbs, and this entire 47-acre lake that she had bought 3 years ago. But she never forgot where she came from, and she never took any of it for granted. The tent went up easily. Amara had done this so many times that she could probably set it up with her eyes closed. She arranged her camping furniture in a circle around where she would build her fire later that evening. Everything had its place and everything looked perfect. She pulled out her phone to take a picture of her setup, but then put it away without taking the shot. This was her time to disconnect from social media and all the notifications that usually filled her day. Across the lake, about half a mile away, stood a small wooden cabin. Smoke was coming from its chimney, which meant someone was home. Amara had seen the cabin before during her previous visits, but she had never met whoever lived there. She figured they were probably nice people who loved the peace and quiet just like she did. The lake was big enough for everyone to enjoy without bothering each other. What Amara didn't know was that inside that cabin, someone was watching her through a pair of binoculars. Karen Mitchell had lived in her cabin for 15 years, ever since her husband died, and she decided she needed a change from city life. Karen had bought the cabin when she retired from her job at the bank, using most of her savings to make the down payment. She loved living by the lake, but she had always assumed that the land around the rest of the lake belonged to the state or the county. Karen lowered her binoculars and frowned. She had never seen this woman before, and the camping equipment looked expensive. Too expensive for someone who was just passing through. Karen had seen plenty of people try to camp illegally around the lake over the years. Most of them left trash behind and didn't respect the natural beauty of the area. Some of them even played loud music late into the night, disturbing the peace that Karen had moved here to find. The woman across the lake didn't look like the usual troublemakers, but Karen had learned not to judge people by their appearance. She watched as the woman efficiently set up what looked like a campsite that belonged in a magazine. The tent was huge and looked like it cost more than Karen spent on groceries in 3 months. The camping chairs looked like they belonged on a movie set. And was that really an espresso machine she was setting up? Karen felt a familiar anger building in her chest. This was exactly the kind of entitled behavior that she couldn't stand. Someone with money thinking that rules didn't apply to them just because they could afford nice things. Karen had worked hard her whole life, following rules and doing the right thing. She had never cut in line, never parked in handicapped spaces, and never tried to get something for nothing. So when she saw other people breaking rules, it made her blood boil. She picked up the binoculars again and watched as the woman started unpacking even more equipment. There were lanterns that looked like they belonged in a fancy outdoor store, a camping table that seemed to unfold itself, and what appeared to be a portable shower setup. This wasn't just someone camping for one night. This person was planning to stay for a while. Karen made a decision. She was going to do something about this. She had been the unofficial guardian of this area for 15 years, and she wasn't going to let some city person with too much money ruin the peace and quiet that she had worked so hard to find. She would give the woman a chance to leave on her own first. That was only fair. But if she refused, Karen would have to take more serious action. Meanwhile, Amara was completely unaware that she was being watched. She was focused on getting her coffee station set up just right. She ground fresh beans that she had bought from her favorite roastery in the city and filled her portable espresso machine with filtered water. The machine hummed quietly as it heated up, and soon the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the pine-scented air. She poured herself a perfect cup and sat down in one of her comfortable chairs. The lake stretched out in front of her like a mirror reflecting the trees and sky. A family of ducks swam by, their wake creating gentle ripples on the water's surface. This was why she had bought this place. This was why she worked so hard. Not just for the money or the success, but for moments like this when she could sit quietly and remember what really mattered in life. Amara pulled out a book she had been trying to finish for months and opened it to the bookmark. But after reading the same paragraph 3 times, she realized she was too relaxed to concentrate on anything other than the beauty around her. She closed the book and just sat, sipping her coffee and watching the world wake up around the lake. She had no idea that her peaceful morning was about to be interrupted in a way she never could have imagined. Karen put down her binoculars and walked to her closet to find her walking shoes. She had decided that watching from across the lake wasn't enough. Someone needed to tell this woman that she couldn't just set up camp wherever she wanted. Karen had seen too many people over the years who thought money could buy them the right to ignore rules and regulations. Well, not on her watch. As she laced up her hiking boots, Karen thought about all the times she had seen campers leave trash behind or start fires in dangerous places. Just last summer, some teenagers had left broken glass on the beach that could have hurt the wildlife. The year before that, a family had tried to cut down a tree for firewood without permission. Karen had reported all of these incidents to the proper authorities, and she was proud of her role as a protector of this beautiful area. The walk around the lake would take her about 20 minutes. Karen grabbed a light jacket and her phone before heading out the door. The morning air was crisp, and she could see her breath in small puffs as she walked. The path around the lake was well worn but not officially maintained. Karen had walked it hundreds of times over the years, and she knew every root and rock along the way. As she walked, Karen practiced what she would say to the woman. She would be polite but firm. She would explain that camping wasn't allowed in this area and give the woman a chance to pack up voluntarily. Karen had learned from her years working at the bank that the best way to handle difficult situations was to remain calm and stick to the facts. Most people would listen to reason if you approached them the right way, but if the woman refused to listen, Karen was prepared to take stronger action. She had the sheriff's department phone number saved in her contacts, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Karen had called them before about various issues around the lake, and they always took her reports seriously. After 15 years of living here, the local deputies knew her as a responsible citizen who only called when there was a real problem. Meanwhile, Amara was enjoying the most peaceful morning she'd had in months. She had finished her first cup of coffee and was considering making another when she heard footsteps approaching through the trees. She looked up to see a woman in her 60s walking toward her campsite with quick, determined steps. The woman's face had the kind of expression that Amara recognized from her business dealings. It was the look of someone who had already made up their mind about something and wasn't interested in hearing other opinions. Amara stood up and smiled, hoping to start whatever conversation was coming on a friendly note. She had learned over the years that most conflicts could be avoided with good communication and a willingness to listen. Maybe this woman was just a fellow nature lover who wanted to chat about the beautiful morning or share information about local wildlife. But the woman's first words quickly made it clear that this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Excuse me," Karen said in a voice that was loud enough to be heard clearly across the water. "Camping isn't allowed here. This is private property, and you need to pack up your things and leave immediately." Amara blinked in surprise. She had been expecting maybe a question about her tent or a comment about the weather. She certainly hadn't been expecting to be told to leave her own property. For a moment, she wasn't sure how to respond. Should she immediately explain that she owned the land? Or should she try to understand why this woman thought she had the authority to tell anyone to leave? "I'm sorry," Amara said, keeping her voice calm and friendly. "I think there might be some confusion here. I have permission to be on this land." Karen's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked even more determined than before. "I don't care what you think you have permission for. she said, crossing her arms over her chest. I've lived in this area for 15 years, and I know the camping regulations. You can't just set up camp wherever you want because you have fancy equipment. The comment about fancy equipment stung a little. Amara had worked hard for everything she owned, and she didn't appreciate the implication that she was some spoiled rich person who didn't understand rules. But she also knew that getting defensive wouldn't help the situation. She needed to stay calm and try to resolve this misunderstanding peacefully. I understand your concern, Amara said, and I appreciate that you care about protecting this area, but I can assure you that I have every right to be here. I'm not causing any damage to the environment, and I always clean up after myself. Karen shook her head vigorously. That's not the point, she said. The point is that there are rules, and rules exist for a reason. You can't just ignore them because it's convenient for you. I've seen too many people come through here thinking they can do whatever they want, and someone needs to stand up for what's right. Amara could see that this woman genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. In her experience, those were often the most difficult people to reason with, because they had convinced themselves that they were on a moral crusade. But Amara also knew that she couldn't let herself be bullied into leaving her own property, especially when she had done nothing wrong. I respect your dedication to protecting this area, Amara said, trying a different approach. Can you tell me who you think owns this land? Maybe we can clear up the confusion by contacting them directly. Karen's laugh was sharp and humorless. Nice try, she said. I know you're just trying to buy time while you think of another excuse. The bottom line is that camping isn't permitted here, period. I don't care if you're here for 1 night or 1 week. You need to pack up and find a legal campground. The conversation was starting to feel like one of those frustrating business negotiations where the other party had already decided they weren't going to compromise on anything. Amara had dealt with plenty of those over the years, and she knew that sometimes the only thing that worked was patience. Eventually, most people would calm down enough to listen to reason. I understand you feel strongly about this, Amara said, but I think if you give me a chance to explain the situation, we can resolve this without any conflict. I'm not trying to cause problems for anyone. I just want to enjoy some time in nature, just like you do. But Karen wasn't interested in explanations or compromise. She had made up her mind that this woman was a rule breaker who needed to be stopped, and nothing Amara said was going to change that opinion. Karen had seen this pattern before. People would start with polite explanations and reasonable-sounding excuses, but eventually they would show their true colors. Usually, they would get angry and try to intimidate her into backing down. Sometimes they would offer money as if everything could be bought. But Karen had never backed down from doing what she believed was right, and she wasn't going to start now. I've heard all the excuses before, Karen said, her voice getting louder. You people think you can talk your way out of anything. Well, I'm not falling for it. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack up your illegal campsite and leave this area. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the sheriff. The phrase, you people, hit Amara like a slap in the face. She had heard those words before, usually from people who were trying to be subtle about their prejudices. Sometimes it was you people who didn't understand small-town values. Sometimes it was you people who thought money could solve everything. And sometimes, though people rarely said it directly, it was you people who didn't belong in certain neighborhoods or certain schools or certain camping areas. For the first time since the conversation started, Amara felt her temper beginning to rise. She had spent her entire career proving herself in boardrooms full of people who looked at her and made assumptions about what she could or couldn't do. She had faced down venture capitalists who questioned whether a young black woman could really run a tech company. She had dealt with clients who asked to speak to her boss, not realizing that she was the boss. And now on her own property, she was being told by a stranger that she didn't belong. But Amara had also learned that losing her temper never solved anything. In fact, it usually made things worse by confirming whatever negative assumptions people had already made. So she took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm, even though every instinct was telling her to put this woman in her place. I can see that you're upset, Amara said, and I want to resolve this situation peacefully, but I need you to understand that I'm not going to be intimidated into leaving when I have every legal right to be here. If you want to call the sheriff, that's your choice, but I think you might be surprised by what they tell you about who owns this property. Karen's face turned red when she heard Amara's calm response. She had expected the woman to either pack up and leave or get angry and start yelling. Instead, Amara was speaking to her like she was the one being unreasonable. This made Karen even more furious because she knew she was right. She had lived by this lake for 15 years, and she knew who belonged here and who didn't. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me," Karen said, pointing her finger at Amara. "I'm trying to protect this beautiful area from people who think rules don't apply to them. And now you're threatening me? That's exactly the kind of behavior I expected from someone like you." Amara felt her heart racing, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply telling you that I have the right to be here. If you want to call the authorities, go ahead. I'm confident they'll confirm what I'm telling you." Karen pulled out her phone and held it up like a weapon. "Fine, you want to play games? Let's play games. I'm calling the sheriff right now and we'll see how tough you are when they get here." She started dialing 911 but then stopped and looked at Amara with suspicion. "You know what? You're probably hoping I'll call them. You probably think you can charm your way out of trouble with some sob story about how you didn't know the rules." The accusation was so ridiculous that Amara almost laughed. If anything, she was hoping Karen wouldn't call the police because she knew how these situations often went. Even when black people were completely in the right, encounters with law enforcement could go wrong in ways that white people never had to worry about. But she also knew that backing down now would only encourage Karen's behavior. "I'm not trying to charm anyone," Amara said. "I'm just trying to enjoy a peaceful morning on my own property. But if calling the police will help you understand the situation, then please make the call." Karen stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if Amara was bluffing. In Karen's experience, people who were breaking rules usually tried everything they could to avoid involving the authorities. The fact that this woman seemed almost eager to have the police come made Karen wonder if she was missing something. But then she reminded herself that some people were just very good liars, and the more confident they seemed, the more suspicious you should be. "All right," Karen said, pressing the call button. "But don't say I didn't give you a chance to do the right thing." The 911 operator answered on the second ring. "911, what's your emergency?" "This is Karen Mitchell," she said, speaking loudly enough that Amara could hear every word. "I live at 412 Pine Lake Road and I need to report a trespasser. There's a woman who has set up an illegal campsite on private property, and she's refusing to leave when asked." Amara couldn't hear the operator's response, but she could see Karen nodding and making agreeable sounds. After a moment, Karen continued with her report. "Yes, she's still here. She has a lot of expensive camping equipment, and she claims she has permission to be here, but I know that's not true. I've lived in this area for 15 years, and I know who owns what." Karen paused, listening to the operator. "No, she hasn't threatened me physically, but she's being very aggressive and argumentative. I'm concerned about what might happen if I try to leave." Amara shook her head in disbelief. Karen was actually making it sound like she was the victim in this situation. This was exactly the kind of thing that made her blood boil. Karen had approached her campsite uninvited, demanded that she leave her own property, and was now calling the police while exaggerating the situation to make herself look like the innocent party. "Yes, I'll stay on the line until they arrive," Karen was saying, "but please tell them to hurry. I don't feel safe with this person here." She ended the call and looked at Amara with satisfaction. "The deputies will be here in about 20 minutes. I hope you enjoyed your little camping trip because it's about to come to an end." Amara pulled out her own phone and opened the video recording app. If this situation was going to escalate, she wanted to have documentation of what really happened. She had learned from watching too many news stories that sometimes the only thing that protected people in situations like this was having video evidence of the truth. "I'm going to record this interaction," Amara announced, holding up her phone. "I want to make sure there's an accurate record of what happens when the police arrive." Karen's eyes widened when she saw the phone camera pointing in her direction. "You can't record me without my permission," she shouted, stepping back like the phone was some kind of dangerous weapon. "That's illegal. I demand that you stop recording me right now." "Actually," Amara said calmly, "we're in a public area, and I have every right to record our conversation. I'm not doing anything illegal by documenting what's happening here." She made sure to speak clearly for the recording. "This is Dr. Amara Thompson, and it's approximately 9:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. I'm being harassed by a woman named Karen Mitchell, who has demanded that I leave my own property and has called the police when I refuse to do so." Karen was practically vibrating with anger now. The fact that this woman knew her name was disturbing enough, but hearing herself described as a harasser was more than she could take. I am not harassing anyone, she yelled. I'm protecting this area from illegal camping. And how do you know my name? Have you been spying on me? You introduced yourself to the 911 operator, Amara reminded her. I wasn't spying on anyone. I was trying to enjoy a quiet morning until you showed up and started making demands. Karen realized that she had given away her name during the phone call, which made her even more upset. She felt like this woman was somehow always one step ahead of her, and it was making her paranoid. Maybe this whole thing was some kind of setup. Maybe this woman had been planning to cause trouble and was recording everything to use against her later. Stop trying to make me look like the bad guy, Karen said. You're the one who's trespassing. You're the one who refused to leave when I politely asked you to, and now you're recording me like I'm some kind of criminal. I've lived here peacefully for 15 years, and I've never had any problems until you showed up. Amara could see that Karen was getting more agitated by the minute, and she knew that arguing with her wasn't going to help anything. The police were coming, and soon this whole situation would be resolved. All she had to do was stay calm and wait for them to arrive, but Karen seemed determined to keep the conflict going. I've been nothing but polite to you, Karen continued, and you've been rude and hostile from the moment I tried to talk to you. You act like you own the place, walking around with your expensive equipment and your attitude like you're better than everyone else. Well, let me tell you something, lady. Money doesn't give you the right to break the law. The irony of that statement was almost too much for Amara to handle. Here was Karen, who actually was acting like she owned the place, accusing Amara of having an attitude. And the comment about money was particularly frustrating because it showed that Karen had already made assumptions about who Amara was and why she was there. I'm not breaking any laws, Amara said into her phone camera. I'm camping on property that I legally own, and I have the documentation to prove it. This woman approached my campsite and demanded that I leave, and when I explained that I have the right to be here, she called the police and is now claiming that I'm being hostile. Karen heard the word own and laughed bitterly. Oh, now you're claiming you own this property? That's rich. I suppose you're going to tell the police that you bought the entire lake? That's the most ridiculous lie I've heard all year. It's not a lie, Amara said simply. I do own this property, all of it. And when the officers arrive, I'll be happy to show them the deed. For just a moment, Karen's confidence wavered. There was something about the way Amara said it that made it sound almost believable. But then Karen reminded herself that liars were often the most convincing people, and she had learned not to trust smooth talkers who always seemed to have an answer for everything. We'll see about that, Karen said, but her voice didn't sound quite as certain as it had before. We'll just see what the police have to say about your so-called ownership papers. The sound of car engines coming up the dirt road reached them before they could see the vehicles. Karen immediately straightened her posture and tried to smooth down her hair. She wanted to look like a respectable citizen when the officers arrived, not like someone who had been yelling at a stranger for the past 30 minutes. Amara remained calm, still holding her phone but lowering it slightly as she saw two sheriff's department vehicles approaching through the trees. The first car pulled up near Amara's campsite, and the second one parked a little further back. 4 doors opened and 2 deputies stepped out. The older officer was tall and heavy-set with graying hair at his temples. His name tag read Rodriguez, and his uniform showed the wear of someone who had been doing this job for many years. The younger officer was shorter and looked like he might have just graduated from the police academy. His name tag said Chen, and his uniform still had sharp creases that suggested it was relatively new. Karen immediately walked toward the officers, waving her hand to get their attention. Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm Karen Mitchell, the one who called. I live just over there, she said, pointing toward her cabin across the lake. This woman has set up an illegal campsite and is refusing to leave when I told her camping isn't allowed here. Officer Rodriguez nodded politely, but didn't say anything yet. He was looking around the campsite, taking in the expensive equipment and the neat, organized setup. Officer Chen was writing notes in a small notebook, glancing back and forth between Karen and Amara, like he was trying to figure out who was telling the truth. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said, addressing Amara, we received a report about unauthorized camping. Can you tell us what's going on here? Amara put her phone in her pocket but made sure the recording was still running. She had dealt with enough business negotiations to know that first impressions mattered, and she wanted to present herself as calm and professional. Good morning, officers. I'm Dr. Amara Thompson. and I was enjoying a peaceful camping trip on my property when this woman approached me and demanded that I leave. When I explained that I own this land, she became upset and called you. Karen made a sound of disgust. She's lying, officers. She's been claiming she owns this property ever since I asked her to leave. I've lived here for 15 years and I know who owns what around this lake. She's just trying to avoid getting in trouble for trespassing. Officer Rodriguez held up his hand to stop Karen from continuing. Let's take this one step at a time, he said in a voice that suggested he had dealt with property disputes before. Ma'am, he said to Amara, if you claim to own this property, do you have any documentation to support that? I do, Amara said, walking toward her SUV. I keep all my important documents in a file folder in my car. If you'll give me just a moment, I can show you the deed and other ownership papers. Officer Chen stepped closer to his partner. Should we escort her to the vehicle? He asked quietly. Officer Rodriguez shook his head slightly. She doesn't seem like a flight risk, he said. Let's see what she has to show us. Amara opened the back door of her SUV and pulled out a leather portfolio that she always kept with her when she traveled. Inside were copies of all her important documents organized in clear plastic sleeves. She found the section marked Property Documents and pulled out several papers before walking back to where the officers were standing. Here's the deed showing that I purchased this property 3 years ago, she said, handing the document to Officer Rodriguez. And here's the property survey that shows the exact boundaries. As you can see, I own 47 acres, including the entire lake and all the surrounding land. Officer Rodriguez took the papers and examined them carefully. Officer Chen looked over his shoulder, reading along. Karen stood a few feet away, tapping her foot impatiently and muttering under her breath about how anyone could fake documents these days. These look legitimate, Officer Rodriguez said after a few minutes. But I'm going to need to verify them with the county records office. He pulled out his radio and called the dispatcher. This is Unit 7 requesting a property records check. I need information on the ownership of the land around Crystal Lake, specifically the 47-acre parcel that includes the lake itself. While they waited for the response, an uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Karen kept glancing at the documents in Officer Rodriguez's hands, and Amara could see doubt creeping into her expression for the first time. Officer Chen continued taking notes, and Officer Rodriguez studied the property survey map. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said to Karen, you mentioned that you've lived here for 15 years. Do you own property in this area? I own my cabin, Karen said, pointing across the lake. I bought it when I retired from the bank. But I always assumed the rest of the land around the lake was public property, or maybe owned by the state. I never saw any no trespassing signs or anything like that. That's because I don't believe in putting up a lot of signs, Amara said. I bought this property as a private retreat, but I've never had problems with people respecting the land. Most visitors are respectful and don't leave any trace behind. The radio crackled to life and the dispatcher's voice came through clearly. Unit 7, I have the property information you requested. The 47-acre parcel, including Crystal Lake, is registered to Dr. Amara Thompson, purchased 3 years ago from the Henderson family estate. The deed is current and all taxes are paid up to date. Officer Rodriguez nodded and handed the documents back to Amara. Well, that settles the ownership question, he said. Dr. Thompson, these documents confirm that you are the legal owner of this property. You have every right to camp here. Karen's face went through several different expressions in rapid succession. First there was disbelief, then embarrassment, then something that looked like anger mixed with confusion. But that's impossible, she said weakly. I've been living here for 15 years. How could someone buy the entire lake without me knowing about it? Property sales are public record, Officer Chen explained. But unless you specifically check the county records, you might not know about changes in ownership, especially if the new owner doesn't post signs or make their presence known regularly. I only come here about 4 times a year, Amara added, usually during the week when most people are working. This is the first time I've encountered anyone who had questions about my being here. Officer Rodriguez looked at Karen with an expression that was sympathetic but firm. Ma'am, I understand there was confusion about the ownership, but making false reports to 911 is a serious matter. In this case, since it seems like an honest mistake, we're not going to cite you for filing a false report. But in the future, you need to be certain of your facts before calling emergency services. Karen's shoulders sagged as the full reality of the situation hit her. Not only had she been wrong about the trespassing, But she had also embarrassed herself in front of the police and probably looked like a fool to this woman, who had been nothing but polite despite Karen's aggressive behavior. I don't understand, Karen said, her voice much quieter than it had been all morning. The Henderson family owned this property? Old Mr. Henderson, who used to live in the big house on the other side of the lake? That's right, Amara said gently. His children sold the property after he passed away. I bought it because I fell in love with the peace and beauty of this place, just like you did when you bought your cabin. Officer Rodriguez was putting away his notebook. Well, it looks like this situation is resolved. Dr. Thompson, you're free to continue enjoying your property. Ms. Mitchell, I'd suggest being more careful about property boundaries in the future. But Karen wasn't ready to let it go yet. The embarrassment was bad enough, but there was something else bothering her. Wait a minute, she said. If you really own all this land, why didn't you say so right away? Why did you let me go on and on about trespassing and call the police? Amara considered the question carefully. It was a fair point, and she could understand why Karen might be confused about her actions. I tried to tell you that I had permission to be here, she said. But you weren't interested in listening. And to be honest, I've learned that sometimes when people are upset, it's better to let the authorities sort things out rather than try to argue about who's right and who's wrong. Officer Chen was nodding as if he understood exactly what Amara meant. In his short time as a police officer, he had already seen several situations where property disputes had escalated unnecessarily because people couldn't communicate effectively with each other. I think we can all learn something from this situation, officer, Rodriguez said diplomatically. Communication is always better than confrontation, and it's always a good idea to verify facts before taking action. He looked directly at Karen when he said this last part. The silence that followed, officer. Rodriguez's words was heavy with embarrassment and regret. Karen stood with her hands clasped in front of her, staring at the ground like a child who had been caught misbehaving. The confident, righteous anger that had driven her actions all morning had completely evaporated, leaving behind only the uncomfortable reality of how wrong she had been. Officer Chen closed his notebook and looked between the two women. Is there anything else we need to address here? He asked. Any other concerns or issues that need to be resolved? Amara shook her head. I don't think so. I just want to enjoy my camping trip in peace. She paused and looked at Karen, who still hadn't raised her eyes from the ground. And I hope Ms. Mitchell understands that there are no hard feelings. We all make mistakes sometimes. Karen finally looked up and her eyes were red with unshed tears of embarrassment. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was so sure I was right. I've been protecting this area for 15 years, and I thought you were just another person trying to take advantage of a beautiful place. I understand, Amara said gently. You care about this land, and that's admirable. I care about it too, which is why I bought it. We both want the same thing, to preserve the beauty and peace of this place. Officer Rodriguez was gathering his equipment and preparing to leave. Well, ladies, it seems like you've worked this out between yourselves. Dr. Thompson, you have our sincere apologies for the inconvenience. Ms. Mitchell, remember what we discussed about verifying facts before making reports. As the officers walked back to their cars, Karen remained standing near Amara's campsite, looking lost and uncertain. Amara could see that the woman was struggling with more than just embarrassment. There was something deeper going on, something that had driven her to react so strongly to a situation that should have been easily resolved. Would you like to sit down? Amara offered, gesturing to one of her camping chairs. You look like you could use a moment to collect yourself. Karen looked surprised by the offer. You want me to sit down? After everything I just put you through? You made a mistake, Amara said simply. But you weren't trying to be malicious. You thought you were protecting something you care about. I can respect that even if I don't agree with your methods. Karen hesitated for a moment, then slowly sat down in the offered chair. She looked out at the lake and her expression softened slightly. I moved here after my husband died, she said quietly. I was so angry at the world, and this place was the only thing that brought me any peace. Over the years, I guess I started feeling like it was my job to protect it. Like it was the one thing I could control when everything else in my life felt chaotic. Amara poured a cup of coffee from her portable maker and handed it to Karen. I'm sorry for your loss, she said. Grief can make us do things we wouldn't normally do. It can make us feel like we need to fight for control over something, anything, to make sense of a world that suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. Karen accepted the coffee gratefully and took a small sip. "How did you know?" she asked. "About the grief, I mean. Most people just tell me I should move on or that I should be grateful for the time I had with him. I lost my father when I was building my business," Amara said, sitting down in her own chair. "I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that felt stable. But I also became very protective of my company, almost paranoid about people trying to take advantage of me or undermine what I was building. It took me a while to realize that my reaction wasn't really about business. It was about trying to hold on to something when I felt like I was losing everything else." The two women sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the lake and listening to the sounds of birds and gentle waves. Karen seemed to be processing not just the morning's events, but perhaps years of emotions that she had been holding inside. "I feel so foolish," Karen finally said. "You've been nothing but gracious, and I came storming over here like some kind of vigilante. And the things I said," she shook her head. "I know how it must have sounded. I know what assumptions I was making, and I'm ashamed of myself." "We all have unconscious biases," Amara said. "The important thing is recognizing them and working to do better. You're not a bad person, Karen. You're someone who cares deeply about something and let that caring cloud your judgment." Karen looked at Amara with something approaching wonder. "How are you being so kind to me? If someone had treated me the way I treated you, I would probably never speak to them again." Amara smiled. "Because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts anyone else. And because I can see that you're genuinely sorry, that means something to me." "Can I ask you something?" Karen said. "Why did you buy this place? I mean, 47 acres is a lot of land for one person." "I grew up poor," Amara said simply. "Really poor. There were times when my family didn't know where our next meal was coming from. I promised myself that if I ever had money, I would use some of it to buy a place where I could find peace. Somewhere I could go to remember who I am underneath all the business suits and board meetings." Karen nodded slowly. "And here I was trying to take that away from you based on nothing but my own assumptions and prejudices." "You didn't know," Amara said. "And to be fair, I could have handled the situation differently too. I could have shown you my documents right away instead of trying to explain my way out of the conflict." "Why didn't you?" Karen asked. Amara considered the question carefully. "Honestly, because I've learned that sometimes when people are determined to see you as a problem, showing them evidence doesn't change their minds. It just makes them look for new reasons to justify their original opinion. I thought maybe if the police came and verified everything officially, you might be more willing to accept the truth." That's really sad that you've had to learn to think that way," Karen said. "It's just reality," Amara replied. "But I'm always hopeful that I'll be wrong, and in this case I think I was wrong about you. You seem like someone who's willing to admit when you've made a mistake." Karen stood up and handed the empty coffee cup back to Amara. "I should let you get back to your vacation," she said. "But before I go, I want you to know that if you ever need anything while you're here, if there are any real problems, or if you just want someone to check on your property when you're not around, I'd be happy to help. Consider it my way of making up for this morning." "I'd like that," Amara said. "And Karen, you're welcome to walk around the property anytime you want. Just maybe knock on my tent next time instead of demanding that I leave." Karen laughed for the first time all day. "Deal," she said. "And Amara, thank you. For the coffee, for the kindness, and for teaching me something important about myself today." As Karen walked back around the lake toward her cabin, Amara settled back into her chair with a fresh cup of coffee. The morning had certainly not gone the way she had planned, but in some ways it had been more rewarding than a simple peaceful camping trip would have been. She had helped someone work through their grief and prejudices, and she had gained a neighbor who might actually become a friend. The lake stretched out before her, as beautiful and peaceful as ever, but now it felt different somehow. It felt less like a private retreat and more like a place where community could happen, where understanding could grow between people who seemed to have nothing in common. Amara pulled out her phone and stopped the recording that had been running all morning. She looked at the file for a moment, then deleted it. Some stories didn't need to be preserved. Some conflicts were better resolved with grace and forgiveness than with evidence and blame. She opened her book again and this time found that she could focus on the words. The morning sun was climbing higher in the sky and the day was full of possibilities. Tomorrow she would probably install a small sign at the entrance to her property, not because she legally needed to, but because it might prevent future misunderstandings. And maybe, just maybe, she would stop by Karen's cabin before she left and invite her new neighbor to join her for coffee by the lake.